Gaetano Salvemini lecture. The Salvemini lecture has become a tradition. Gaetano Salvemini, of course, is a famous anti-fascist exile. He started as a young socialist politician in pre-World War I Italy, and then ended up here teaching from the 30s into the early 50s, I guess, then went back home. He was a formidable polemicist and publisher. We owe some of the very early and brilliant works about fascism to him, to Salvemini. And it was my friend Renato Camuri, who is a professor in the University of Verona, I think, historian, and is it? I always forget whether it's Verona or Verona. That's what I thought. Who has written on has written on Salvemini at Harvard, has written more generally, Renato, on Italian exiles in America. He's written on, he's published on Franco Modigliani's Views from America, and now has a collana out on the Italian refugees or exile thought during the fascist period. So Renato had this genial idea of commemorating Salvemini. We have two commemorations of Italian anti-fascists at Harvard. One is the Lauro de Bossis Chair in Italian Civilization. It funds postgraduate studies. It has lectures too, and we've had that a long time. And this is the annual, now the Salvemini lecture, which is designed to think about contemporary or issues of recent Italian history. And I have to thank, and it's my pleasure to thank the Italian consulate for the consulate has, and the Republic of Italy has funded these lectures generously and continues to do so. So thank you, Mr. DeSantis, for your role in this. Now today, Renata and I confer each year on what seems to be a good topic for the year, and this is 2016. It's the 70th anniversary of the Italian Republic, and we thought it's suitable, it's Renato's idea, to do something commemorating the advent of the Republic. And since one decisive change that the Republic brought with it was the somewhat overdue, but was the was admitting women to electoral participation. And so we've asked Nadia Urbinati of Columbia University to give this talk. Her title of her talk is "Nothing Changed, but Nothing Was the Same Again," on the 70th anniversary of Italian women's suffrage. So we can both have a lecture that deals with the role of women in politics and the and marking the Republic. Now, Nadia Urbinati's the Republic started with a narrowly won plebiscite. Yes. And Nadia Urbinati, in her latest book and writing, published in 2014 with Harvard University Press, the book is Democracy Disfigured, Opinion, Truth, and the People, talks about very presciently and very relevantly the dangers of populism. I think we've all been witnessing that. The dangers of technocratic government for its distancing from democracy, and the dangers of plebiscitary democracy. And I think watching Brexit, I think we can all say that much of that has been confirmed. But we do owe the Italian Republic to a plebiscitary victory, so maybe some plebiscites are better than other plebiscites, or some referenda. And Nadia, Professor Urbinati, is on the Faculty of Political Science or Government Politics at Columbia. She's a theorist. She was born in 1955 in Rimini, got her PhD degree from the European University in Fiesole. She's taught at NYU, she's taught in Brazil, and now at Columbia. And she's focused on liberal thought, and in a sense she exemplifies and carries on the tradition of Norberto Bobbio, who was one of her mentors, I believe. She's written her work on John Stuart Mill, Representative Democracy, Principles of Genealogy, and then she's Mill on Democracy, from the Athenian Polis to Representative Government. They've been prize-winning books. She's edited the writings of Giuseppe Mazzini, Piero Gobetti, and Carlo Rosselli, the anti-fascist of exile of Giustizia e Libertà, who was murdered in Paris. And she intervenes in Italian debates, as is one of the nice things about Italian academics, I think, La Repubblica. But Il Sole 24 Ore, so she can't be too far off the mark. And she has been awarded the Commendatore dell'Ordine al Merito della Repubblica Italiana. So she holds a national medal. So that and her new book, I was reading about the new book. I haven't read it yet, Nadia, but I think you strike all the right notes. I mean, that is, you agree with me, or I agree with you, which is always a good basis for soundness. So, as I said, she will. This is a talk which is both historical and relevant, and I think at our moment in American democracy, which is a rather troubled one, I believe, it may be exceptionally relevant. So Nadia Urbinati, if you wish, it may be easier for, she said, to speak sitting down. I leave the choice to her.
Yeah, thank you, because I had some problems with my...
Let's just make sure the...
yeah, it works, right? No. No.
Do you want to say a word?
Yes.
Please.
Grazie. So che non potete aspettare, I know that we're all waiting for Nadia Urbinati, especially Professor Mayo, but I will be very, very brief. And I want to thank you, all of you, because it is my pleasure and honor to be here with you this evening in the 5th edition of the Gaetano Salvemini Colloquium on Italian History and Culture at the Center of European Studies. It is a great opportunity to discuss about Italy and Italian history here at Harvard. I would like to extend my appreciation to those who have been so helpful in bringing this colloquium to life, and first and foremost to Professor Charles Meyer. Many thanks also to Helen Papoulias, Executive Director of CES, for continually supporting us, and to Professor Renato Camurri, who has the great merit to strongly believe in this initiative and support it from the very beginning. It is with great pleasure that I'm here with you today to celebrate Salvemini and Italian history. The Salvemini Colloquium is part of the Week of the Italian Language in the World. It is an event that takes place in the 3rd week of October each year, and now it's in the 16th edition. This year marks the Italian Republic's 17th anniversary. 17 years ago, the Italian people went to the ballots to choose which type of government they wanted, monarchy or republic. On June 2nd, 1946, a new nation, La Repubblica d'Italia, was born. Yet, 1946 marked another historic event to democracy, women's right to vote and therefore universal suffrage. Courageous, intelligent, and fearless women not only actively participated in the Italian resistance, contributing to the liberation of Italy from the Nazi-fascist regime, but have made their contribution in the drafting of the Italian Constitution. In fact, 5 of them were elected to the Commissione dei 75, Commission of the 75, in charge of writing the new Constitution, which entered into force on the 1st of January 1948, working to make sure it included women's rights. Actually, one of the fundamental and perhaps one of the most powerful articles of the Italian Constitution is Article 3, that states: tutti i cittadini hanno pari dignità sociale e sono uguali davanti alla legge, senza distinzione di sesso, di razza, di lingua, di religione, di opinioni politiche, di condizioni personali e sociali. Translated, all citizens have equal social dignity and are equal before the law, without distinction of sex, race, language, religion, political opinion, personal and social conditions. In those 70 years, the role of women in politics has been increasing, and I am sure that today's colloquium will be of extreme interest for all of us to learn more about it. I want to express my gratitude to all of you, to Professor Urbinati, hoping that this fruitful collaboration with the Center of European Study will continue to grow in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll try. If I feel tired, then So, thank you very much. It is truly an honor, and I feel moved and sort of commossa for this invitation, and also for the topic that is connected to this invitation, which is not simply the celebration of the 70th anniversary of our republic, but it is the 70th anniversary of the Italian women's suffrage, and this is the topic of my lecture. The two together is very interesting, and the main issue of my topic is precisely the fact that they are both together. They were born together as democracy and as with women inside. So I'd also like to thank all of you for being here, and just to break my previous plan that I had in my mind, but I have to do that. I thought that I had to break it. And I want to simply mention you a citation from a French anti-suffragist in 1793, because it's so fantastically good for today. So I thought I will start with that. This is the citation. A man is a male only occasionally. Think about Trump, eh? But a woman is a female in all moments of her life. For this reason, she doesn't deserve suffrage, right? So that is the reference point for our thinking about male and female in relation to politics. Now, the decreto luogotenenziale, the decree number 33, February the 1st, 1945, with the title Estensione alle donne del diritto di voto, the extension to women the right to vote, was fantastic for the way in which it was made, achieved, actualized. This was a revolutionary decision. And that decision, so revolutionary, was even more striking because it was unique in the way in which it was achieved. Italian women became full citizens in a surreal climate of serenity, expedite process, and with no discussion. A letter from Palmiro Togliatti on January 20th to Alcide De Gasperi to solicit the decision by the government, and a phone call by De Gasperi to Prime Minister Ivano Bonomi inviting him to proceed quickly, were enough two moves, to include the decree on women's suffrage in the memo of the government's meeting scheduled on January the 31st. The decree was the last of several items to be discussed that day and was approved with no discussion, no objection, in a stroke of fingers. So the right to vote was conferred with no reference to the right to be elected, was conferred on all 20 years old Italian women except for registered prostitutes. The exclusion of the prostitutes was to be overcome 10 years later, along with the abolition of brothels and the policy of registration of prostitution. Women's rights to vote, with an explicit specification that they could be elected at the age of 25, was the object of another decree on March the 10th, 1946, which is taken to be today officially the date of the Italian women's full political emancipation. So the immediate effect of these two important moves was that first, 3 women were elected in the administrative elections for municipal counting, for municipal councils in the spring of 46. And secondly, and more importantly, that in the institutional referendum of June the 2nd, 1946, which sanctioned the birth of the Republic, 226 women were included as candidates in the party list, and 21 of them were elected members of the Constitutional Assembly, over 556 men. The Italian Republic had its founding mothers: 9 communists, 9 democratic Christians, 2 socialists, 1 from Uomo Qualunque. They played a seminal role in drafting some key articles of the Constitution on family, maternity, labor's rights, and equal opportunity, and had a direct influence in drafting Article 2 and Article 3, just mentioned, the core articles of the Italian democratic constitution. Now, the history of democratic Italy started and developed with women within the demos. Formally, Italian democracy was born democratic, and this is something interesting to be analyzed. Almost a century of humiliating denials, ignored petitions, motions rejected by courts, and disparaging comments on women's immodest desire for power, on the futility of their suffrage, and in fact its danger, all of that seemed vanished with a snap of fingers, as I said. Of course, reality was more complicated, and as the very protagonists, women, would soon complain, nothing changed, in fact. The opinion concerning their supposed natural place in family had not vanished in 1945-46. We could hear, even today, the same refrains a few months ago when a pregnant woman competed in Rome's mayoral elections, or 2 years ago when Federica Mogherini was appointed High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs in the European Union. Questions: could a pregnant woman take care of the public good? And could a woman lead an European strategic office? So still today. Yet, it is a fact that in 1945, these embedded prejudices did not have enough strength to block political inclusions. Something had happened that made the discriminatory opinions, if not vanished away, certainly unable to impose, to change, to influence political decision. The conviction was unanimous that women deserved to be full citizens, because they participated in the, of course, war of liberation from Nazi fascism, and thus this could not be simply ignored. Now, participation in war was, of course, crucial in decreeing women's emancipation in 1945. But why? And this is the main issue of my topic. After all, that was not the first time that women had contributed or sacrificed themselves for a war. What made that sacrifice different from previous ones? Think about 1912, in the aftermath of the conquest of Libya. On the occasion of the extension of suffrage to a large portion of men, women also claimed to deserve public recognition, since many of them had volunteered in the Red Cross, had led for Africa, to assist and cure their colonizer compatriots, but their request was ignored. Or think about 1918, when all adult men achieved suffrage and women claimed, once again, to deserve political inclusion because of their role as auxiliaries to Italian soldiers. But yet again, the request was not successful. Even President Wilson recognized on September the 30th, 1918, in his famous 15 minutes address to the Senate, "We have made partners of the women in this world. Shall we admit them only to a partnership of suffering and sacrifice, and not to a partnership of privilege and rights?" And yet, in Italy, not even then their merit was judged enough meritorious. Italian women came very close to emancipation with the 1919 Legge Sacchi, which extended to all citizens the same political rights. But anticipated elections blocked the Senate's approval. The acceleration of suffragism within the parliament between 1912 and 1919 was, however, a fact, prepared by important movements of opinions that, beginning in the 80s, have started a multi-phased campaign in public opinion. Moreover, there was a suffragist movement all around Europe. The Alliance for Women's Suffrage was born in Berlin in 1904 and had an Italian branch, the Consiglio delle Donne Italiane, chaired by Anna Maria Mozzoni, the first important suffragist capable of having an impact in the opinion, at least with acculturated women. But it was not enough. All the political parties, although they were changing a little bit their positions concerning their negativity in relation to women's voting rights, simply because for the socialists, for instance, women were too connected to Catholicism, they couldn't be trusted. The popular and the communists were also in favor of women elections, but right to vote, but they thought that the social or the working condition of women was more important than the political protagonist of women. So the debate is very interesting. I don't have time to refer in detail. The fascists themselves, at the beginning, the fascist party was not totally against the inclusion of women, particularly in administrative election. They were wavering between a no and perhaps. Although in 1925 there was no longer reason for being ambiguous, because in 1 month, the situation practically changed. Think about that. Now, November 25th, 1925, the famous year of the dictatorial move, a law was approved that recognized women the right to vote in local elections. But 1 month later, another law was approved that abolished elected administrative organs. So women's exclusion from political life became the fascist template for all Italian citizens. The institution of fascist regime coincided with a campaign in favor of fertility and the sharp gender division of social roles. Family and maternity were assumed under the state as functions to be fostered, protected, and ideologized. But fascism, after all, entrenched in the law of the state what already existed in the Italian social imaginary, the idea of a trade-off between protection by the state and service to the nation. Full devotion to children and husbands and the impossibility of choosing the domestic life by free choice was the price women had to pay for receiving assistance by the state and being full Italians. So it is fair to say that Italy's unification was not great business for women. For some of them, the year 1861, the year of the unification, marked a regress in terms of rights. In Lombardy, in Veneto, in Tuscany, some women had started enjoying the right to vote in administrative elections in late 1840s, along with the right of administering their property. But with the extension to the whole peninsula of the Statuto Albertino, the charter of the constitution of the Savoy Kingdom, all women and the largest majority of adult men were stripped of basic political rights. Few data to give you the sense of the public status of women and men in Italy in 1871, when the capital city was moved to Rome. Over a population of 20 million, Italian electors were 530,000. Although the new political vocabulary used the word citizen, this word was applied to a country of subjects, as only 1.98% were actually electors. Women were part of the 98% of subjects. Yet, unification became the starting point of their struggle for political autonomy. Women became political actors well before becoming voters, well before achieving suffrage. I mentioned Anna Maria Mozzoni, an important democratic figure, universalist, and with a sense that rights belongs to the person, not because we deserve and we do something in exchange for a vote, but because it has to do with the equal distribution of power. She translated into Italian John Stuart Mill, The Subjection of Women, and was the author of 2 important petitions to the parliaments in 1877 and in 1906 on women's suffrage. Yet, that first radical generation of feminism didn't last very much. The second generation was much more important, influential, but also less radical. And the idea of the merit, that is, the idea of women had to have a kind of social merit in order to deserve right, became an important argument. In the generation of so-called nationalistic time. The argument of social merit, however, faulted women. Because if the nation was made, as it was, into in a large family, women were simply doomed to play for the nation the subaltern functions they were already playing at home. So the religion of the nation, Republican or nationalist, was of no help to them. So linking suffrage to some special qualities or potentials or social functions appeared to be, those days, more gradual approach, and thus perhaps better fit to a patriarchal society, but it was a failure as a strategy. Because regardless of the ideological success of the parallel between nationhood and motherhood, deeply rooted both in the Republican and in the national tradition of the 19th century, women would not simply deserve equal political recognition by claiming to be children of the same nation and discharge their obligation. This is clear. Hegel explained in The Philosophy of Rights that in modern nation states, dying for the nation was not an issue of free choice of the subject or personal decision, but descended from an unquestionable decision by the sovereign, commanding his subjects to be ready to give their life when and if needed. So to be enrolled in the army was the mark of political belonging in a conception of the state as a legal space inhabited by subjects that were endowed with qualities and proficiencies needed for fighting in a war. Those qualities and proficiencies not instead up to assist the wounded, to support the fighters, or substituting for men in civilian labors and economical productions. So, Sibilla Ramo wrote during World War I, war is not a women's creature, and the beautiful death, la bella morte, of the hero is not for them. So, given this conception of the state and the war, and the duty to serve a war, we can grasp the reason why 1945 was such an important year. Why in 1945 women were judged ready to become citizens, and why they could achieve the right to vote so easily and with no almost discussion. What's happened in 1945? The conception of the right to vote had not changed in between. They had simply the same idea, all of the men who accepted to sign that famous decree I mentioned at the beginning. Thus, actually, it's not the war as such the issue we have to ponder, to grasp why 1945 was so crucial and so unique in the speediness in which women got that decree. But it is the type of war, and it is the relationship between war and state. Now, women did not fight in a regular war. They were not soldiers of the Italian states, which was in fact disintegrated when they became combatants. They entered the masculine public space when the state had practically ceased to exist. So this was a fortunate and exceptional accident that made them citizens. Indeed, the war of resistance was a unique kind of war that allowed women to enroll because it was based on voluntary participation, unknown to nation states' compulsory army and to a regular war. It was a clandestine movement that led the decision of starting a war against both the fascist Italian state and its German ally. And it was a voluntary war that marked the natality of both the Italian democracy and women's citizenship. A radical change in Italy's political life, a change in the conception of participation to begin with, not simply because it made possible the birth of Italian new institutional order, but also because it created the condition for the redefinition of the demos, and I would say, and this is the second part of my lecture, of a parity democracy. It started from there. So the war of resistance changed politics well beyond the intention of those who participated in it. Women combatants in the resistance changed the character of the resistance because they made visible, with their presence, the anti-egalitarian sentiments and behaviors of their male companions, which persisted nonetheless and would persist later on. Officially recognized women partisans were 35,000, of whom 512 played the high role of war commissary. 2,750 of them were either executed or died in concentration camps under torture or on the field. Yet, the number of a guerrilla warfare involves, that a guerrilla warfare involves are difficult to assess, as we know. Arrigo Boldrini, a leader of the Italian Resistenza, suggested that the proportion between irregular army and supporting population could be as high as 1 to 12 or even 15, doubling the proportion in the case of a regular army. This means that the number of people and women involved in the war of liberation was thus higher than the small official figures. Moreover, the meaning and symbolic impact of that war was disproportionately deeper than the relatively small number of men and women involved directly. As Miriam Afai argued earlier on, the voluntary nature of the war of liberation had an extraordinary psychological and moral impact on Italian women's and mores. Regardless of the rhetoric of fighting for their family and children, which persisted throughout the Resistenza, in the young women's decision to take part in the clandestine war, there was also a lively sense of individual liberty and liberation. And there was a desire of, I quote from several letters, very interesting, of imitating men, fighting like men, living in the hide like them. It was for many women, most of them very young, between 15 and 19, an opportunity to gain freedom from home, from family's duties, from domestic hierarchies. So not only solidaristic and caretaking thus, as the leftist party's rhetoric liked to stress during and moreover after the Resistenza, in order to find some feminine quality in their women companions, and moreover to tame their thirst for liberty. But also the desire to emancipate themselves from a patriarchal environment, to leave home, and moreover, this is crucial, to obey like men obey. This is an expression they use. That is, to obey captains and not fathers or husbands. Aristotle teaches us that the freedom of the citizen, shows itself both in the way citizens make decisions, that is, by making laws, and the way they obey. They don't obey men, but they obey laws and magistrates. So women were looking for that when they enrolled in the Resistenza. But we know that despite women's equal participation in the Resistenza, they were rarely allowed to obey like their male companions. The stories told by them, by the participants, and collected after the war, show that almost all the domestic hierarchies reproduce themselves in the brigades. I quote, also in the Garibaldi brigades, which is the most communist and thus the most leftist, women served to make laundry, fix clothes, and at most they were commanded to be estafetta. Come si dice estafetta? Messengers. Moreover, the majority of women were denied, and this is, I was shocked reading all the documents, were denied recognition for their heroism, as when, after the liberation, they were not allowed to join the parades with the victorious partisans and march with them on the streets. This is incredible. The partisans thought that only by concealing their promiscuous relation with women in the hide they could achieve ethical dignity and moral authority with the population. Remember, they were not regular soldiers, but had to behave and present themselves as such in order to win credibility. And as regular soldiers, they didn't want to have women appear as their companions. So women combatants were deemed not honorable, not a model for civilian women. In fact, they were sometimes seen like prostitutes, and the sacrifice they made out of their free choice gained low esteem and reputation, and even the mark of immorality. Thus, while, I quote, many of them had participated in the resistance, very few achieved recognitions for what they had accomplished. Yet, directness in self-determination marked an important change, even if not in a moral environment, an important change, but a change nonetheless. The end of the war, this is visible for the reaction after the end of the war. The end of the war and the need of a quick return to normality revealed in reverse the revolutionary implication of women's direct participation in democracy's natality. Not only because of the new claims women advance on parity in the working place and social security provisions, but because they were questioning female and male relationships in the private sphere as well as in the public. The premonition of the impact of individual rights and on customs and subjective morality seemed frightened for them, or frightening them, men and women alike. It is impossible to ascribe, of course, planning intentions to collective events. Yet it is a fact that the return to normality was inaugurated by a politics of concealment in the form of a representation of the Resistenza as a parenthesis, a heroic event to be worshipped as a myth, a monument of the new civic religion of the Republic, depoliticized and stripped of its emancipatory implications. We may thus say that if before 43, 45, women's participation in a war was a desideratum, after that date it was a reality to be narrowed in scope through an interpretation that concealed what it was able to bring to surface. An example, to give the sense of this embarrassment with emancipation through Resistenza. It may be interesting to recall the sentence of the Corte di Cassazione, the Constitutional Court, of 1955, according to which, I quote, we are 55, 8 years after. An husband does not abuse his marital potestas, power, authority, when he prohibits his wife to exercise a professional activity that impedes her to assist her husband and her children in the case it is not needed by the financial condition of the breadwinner. So, as you can imagine, the year 1946 inaugurated a new historical process that was all but easy toward the parity democracy, and that passed through a fatal contestation of the ascriptive dualism between men's and women's roles in view of constructing a public space to be shared by both genders and thus open to all. So, almost ignored by the press, the famous 1945 decree, the swift decision on women's suffrage of 1945 sanctioned publicly the split and tension between a politics of rights and the traditional opinion on gender roles. An early instance of that tension emerged in the Constitutional Assembly, in which women, although very few, and although members of different parties, they tended to converge on issues directly involved gender roles in family and in the working place. An example, the constitutional debate on the definition of family as founded on marriage. It was connected to whether or not to attach to the word marriage also indissolubility. And there was a debate, and not all women at the beginning were in favor because they were not yet used to have rights protecting them in case of divorce, of course, but they accepted the cancellation of this indissolubility. This was an important move because it was the open door to the possibility of a law regulating divorce as it happened in the 70s. Or equally important was women's role in the debate over the definition of maternity, Article 31, when all of them together opposed the proposal to add the adjective essential to maternity, a linguistic expediency that, if successful, would reintroduce a naturalistic vision of gender identity and name in the Constitution the sphere in which only women would belong. The consequence of that victory on parity would be enormous and shows its revolutionary implications in the years to come. In 1977, when a law on, I read, parity of treatment between men and women on issues of labor was approved that abolished residues of discrimination still existing in the civil code, inherited by pre-democratic regimes. A decision then, again, with another law, extending maternity leave to fathers, thus equalizing families' roles in relation to social obligations and exonerations. Coming closer to our time, the shortcomings of legal statutes meet with persisting attempts to neutralize parity. To make few examples, Italy has a national code of equal opportunities and laws implementing directives of the EU on equal opportunities and equal treatments in matters of employment. Legal support for women who are discriminated against is provided by a network of equality advisors. However, no efficient measures has yet been implemented against the practice of dimissione in bianco. I explain you. The practice of employers of making hiring a young woman conditional to signing an undated letter of resignation to be used to justify dismissals in case of pregnancy. Another case is that of family law, very advanced, recognizes perfect equality between men and women and gives the same rights to children born outside or inside marriage, and yet the Italian legislation, one of the last in Europe, has to adopt the recent judgment of the European Court on Human Rights on the rights of the mother to give her family name to her children. So women's presence inside of the Constitution was crucial. And they were aware how important their role was. Think about that. Maria Federici, Democratic Christian, one of the best and most fighter in the assembly, said in September 1946, I quote, talking about how to regularize family life. Along with the family constituted according to the law, it is possible to envisage the formation of non-regular nucleuses of family that don't, however, have social and juridical guarantees. Thus, the constituents, she added, should be able to anticipate, to foresee that, I quote, provisions of social assistance and rights have to be recognized equally to both kinds of families. So the principle of parity, as applied to different types of union, has thus a long history, and certainly it dates back to the Constitutional Assembly, although it materialized only 4 months ago, the civil unions law. So, to many women who had fought in that war, the war of the resistance, the conquest of their political autonomy appeared very soon thus to be mostly a formal status. Toothless and futile, a power without threat. I quote, "We didn't get nothing. Parity is only on paper. It is more a figure of speech than a real condition." From a partisan 1947. Legal innovation on issues on parity was slowly and occurred in a climate of social tension and discontent. The law instituted equal opportunity and thus fulfilling Article 3, second comma, that you didn't read, unfortunately. I don't have it with me, the text. I have only the Italian. That is a duty of the Republic to remove all the obstacles for making that liberty not a formality. That law was approved only in 1984. So the turning point of cultural change occurred in the 70s, we know. First, the law regulating divorce, then the law with the new legislation of family relations, and finally abortion. Civil and social movements were the main protagonists of the cultural revolution. The referendum on divorce was the first truly democratic victory, the result of a process political process that involved representative institutions and the citizen in particular, women in particular, who were the direct protagonists of changing the opinion of the former parties. So the slow motion of the decision-making system, which is still preponderantly masculine, was generally challenged from outside of state institutions, thus proving that the presence of women within elected organs is crucial, because elected women would have an irresistible power to advance at least issues and problems, if not to achieve legislations according to their own view of parity, of course. I simply like to mention briefly, before going to the conclusion, the story of the approval of Article 51 of the Constitution, and late the discussion for a change of this article, the integration, is very interesting. The original text, approved in 1947, recites as follows: any citizen of either sex is eligible for public offices and elected positions on equal terms, according to the condition established by the law. Long discussion for years until 2004. A new Article 51 went through a revision in order to make this addition, this integration. To this end, the Republic shall adopt specific measures to promote equal opportunity between men and women. The discussion in Parliament to reach that integration of Article 51 was incredible. Some men said, it's public, you can read it in the web, used to say that to write that article in any case would be useless because, I quote, it is hard to find women truly competent or competent like men anyway. And moreover, women's claim for political equality in representative institutions is simply ridiculous. Once women had conquered suffrage, it became clear that the right to vote did not entail necessarily women that had their voice strong enough to be heard. It underlined that the right to vote and the right to representation are not identical and not a mere formal issue either. So power relations, well rooted in society, condition the way equal rights are applied and implemented. In this sense, a women bloc, like there is a men bloc, a women bloc. The critical number of them in the parliament would be an essential strategy, regardless of the concrete decisions women would make. Remember that among the European member states, Italy is still today among those that includes less women representative institutions. The role of Europe has been paramount, as most of Italian more recent legislations on parity came to completion thanks essentially to the pressing role played by the EU Commission and its strategy on gender equality. Nevertheless, it would be wrong to conclude that the radical change of 45-46 was nothing but a cunning strategy for keeping all things go on unchanged, to paraphrase Lampedusa's Leopard. This would mean to agree on the futility of suffrage, a disquieting anti-democratic argument that, alas, some people seem to love these days. Moreover, it would also amount to a wrong depiction of the Italian democratic society. It is certainly true that the dual destiny of genders, private and public, rooted within Catholic popular culture, has shown an extraordinary resilience. Above all, if we consider the decline of the church's influence on Italian costumes. So the domestic and the sexual roles that still represent Italian women so prominently, think about the Governo Berlusconi years, indicate simply that it takes time for the culture of rights to become common sense, common culture, and more importantly, to have more women in politics, is essential. And thus, I conclude. No, wait, because I have the last line, because I like it. In fact, the presence of women in the political institutions has characterized the entire history of the Republic. It was only in 1975 that, for the first time, a woman was appointed minister, and only in 1979 a woman was appointed Speaker of the Low House. Italy never had a woman as a Prime Minister or President of the Republic. And even members of the Constitutional Court, there were very few. And despite the reform of Article 21 of the Constitution, women's participation in public life is not supported by consistent legislation that removes obstacles, social and political as well. But a change seemed to occur with the 2013 elections. That is to say, after some years of mobilizations against Berlusconi's government, share of women in parliament increased by 10% with the last election, reaching the highest level ever, 31%. Women make up half of the present cabinet, composed only of 6 ministers, 8 of them are women. But they are the minority in the whole government if deputy ministers are also counted. They are 9 out of 44. So the backbone of political power is still held in quasi-monopolistic style and number by male citizens. So, and here I conclude, a good way to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Italian women's achievement of the right to vote is by bearing in mind that the claim of political inclusion is in effect a permanent beginning. Thank you so much.
Take questions?
I should.
Would it stand for questions, or would it? Okay. I'd like you to clarify, the right to vote is not the right to representation.
They are not
Would
the
you-
same.
Would you explicate that a bit?
Yes. Yes. So in the right to vote, not in a direct democracy, but in a representative democracy we are talking, in which we don't vote on but for somebody, not on things, the vote has two powers into one. A power of choosing by electing A instead of B, but also, if he's our representative, of expressing through him or her some views or some claims, some common views. So, of course, this cannot be schematized and formalized like the right to vote, because we don't have imperative mandate. But since we are not simply talking about delegates but representatives, they are supposed to make these connections, and for this reason parties are important, with citizens in order to make the right to vote also the right to be represented.
Okay. So
Why we say sometimes, I don't feel represented, even if we go to vote, and even if we have the right to vote. We say so. We say many times. Women who were, because if you look at the parliament, which is a place very strange, because it's a formal institution based on a formal right, the right to vote, and yet it wants to be, as the great Emile used to say, it has the ambition of being more than a formal institution, because it is the image, the face of the country. So people need to represent themselves there. So if you have a parliament in which you have only men and not women, well, you feel, of course, I have the right to vote, but I don't feel very much represented by the parliament. You know, it's like that. It's like you have only white instead of. So it's the same. The parliament is a strange institution that wants to have both formal and visual, informal.
I agree. Well, we could get into a real discussion here, but I mean, I'm not. No. I mean, if the quality in the political struggle, I think you're saying, is to win
Inclusion.
the inclusion, but in a right to be represented in something beyond just arguing.
Yeah.
So when does gender, why should the right of representation be, I mean, are there rights that are not represented today besides insufficient gender?
Well,
Should there be this is the question of the
exactly. That is a
quota.
question of quota. For instance, the discussion the Constitutional Court in Italy had some years ago on quota, which were proposed in the Article 51, the first draft, they refused it because, of course, it goes against the principle of equal rights, and this is understandable. although there are other ways of having quotas, informally through within parties. For instance, when there were mass parties, they used to have quotas. They have the Communist Party, which I knew the better, because I saw them in Bologna, how they constructed their representation to go to a congress or to go to a party list or formation. They have 33% working class, 25% women, even there were women, and so on and so forth. So there was a kind of dosage inside, because they knew that the party is a synthesis of many different claims. So you need to have the presence of the claims inside. So the question of representation does, in representative democracy, has been fulfilled somehow or taken care about somehow by political parties. Until you have political parties, as and Phillips used to say, fantastic, until the political parties, that is representation of ideas, they work, women or others, they don't feel that they are not represented, because there is participation in the making of programs, of ideas. But when parties decline, then you ask for your presence, because there are no ideas in action so strongly. So today, the question of presence becomes more relevant than it was before, because there is no ideological parties connecting claims, because parties are no longer place in which not only you select an elite, but you have you regulate representation, you channel claims. Parties are party cartel, meaning they are inside of an institution making cartels among themselves in order to protect their own positions, more than representing claims, or not all of them, or all they represent differently or unproportionally, or not conveniently for those who are excluded, of course. Another issue, proportional representation. Until there was proportional representation, although more fragmentary, it's true that you needed to have, coalition, blah, blah. Women were more present at many levels and organs than after that. So yes, the question of representation is an issue, although not formalized, because you cannot have a formalistic definition of all the political science would become crazy if you talk about representation as a right. Is the right to vote, but representation is not a right, because there is nothing to represent once you vote. As the great Harrow used to say, there is nothing to represent, because the voting is an expression not of you, but it's an expression, in fact, because John Dewey used to say in a beautiful line, when we go to vote, we put inside of our pocket all our little notes concerning what we want, what we don't, and in that vote there is like a filter. We filter all our visions. So that we call now preference, we call then ideas, but that. So the vote has for us, although not informal, by formality, has for us a sense that is beyond simply selecting Mr. A to go to Parliament.
We have these difficulties with affirmative action, of course.
But in Europe too, there is now.
Yeah, right. No, it's true. Race will become a category, or ethnicity. So, questions that. Everybody is convinced, or everybody is shy, or Sarah Lorenzini.
I'm not shy. No, I think I.
You better take it, because the room
All right.
is-
Thank you very much, Nadia, for the wonderful lecture. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here and to take part in this anniversary, which indeed, as an Italian and as an Italian woman, is very important, with child annex, because the rights of women are important, but the duties are also many. Then I have a question, because I'm not fully convinced of your point about the war of resistance as the main lever for change in the role of women, and in the fact that women finally in 1945 get representation. Because you also mentioned that in the Resistenza, parity was not really recognized. And so I was wondering whether there are not other reasons, because I have sort of a feeling, thinking about Italian politics in the long run, not just about women, but as a more general consideration, I have a feeling of the importance for Italian policy making of the vincolo esterno, of this feeling that there is Italian politics actually absorbs a lot from what happens outside, from the general wave. And I was wondering, and this is my point, and I don't know what you think and others in the public think about this, whether what happened in 1945 is that actually Italian politics absorbed the general wave in terms of women representation in Europe and elsewhere. And possibly also because the influence of the communist danger and the importance of the Communist Party and the whole self-representation of the role of parity, men and women, that in communist culture, not mainly, maybe not so specifically in the Italian Communist Party yet at the time, but more in general in Europe this had. I was wondering whether you can see sort of the importance and of the external influence over what happened and on what happened in Italy then.
Yeah, in the introductions, the few pages of this long lecture, I anticipate that I cannot cover all the aspects, the condition, the influence that are behind that important event, right? In 40 pages, 28 pages is impossible. We know that. So we have to make a choice. My choice was the War of the Resistance for a reason that is clear. Because I made a kind of mental thought, or kind of, imagine as if, okay, the as if. If the Italian state did not collapse, if we had the Italian state, all the enrolled men in the army were men, they were not women. Women, once again, would not fight like men. They would be like auxiliaries, like they did in, not guardians, but auxiliaries of the guardians. This is. No, I know that meanwhile there was the League of Nations, meanwhile there was an international community, the movements in England, in the United States, in the Soviet Union, they had already the right to vote. Clear. But since the question of merit, you have to deserve, like, you work, you fight, there is a long, of course, theoretical tradition about that and historical tradition. Well, that was for me a fortunate coincidence that women could really fight, truly, with rifles. Otherwise, they would have the right to vote. Of course, at that point, after 120 years, they would have the right to vote, like in other countries. But that fighting, since the fight was the fight, it was always claimed that you have to do your service and your duty for the Republic, or for the state, for the nation. But that kind of duty, because you have to be, there are hierarchies of duties in order to, we know that. So that was the kind of thought I had. So I went to see, Carlo Pavone, the question of resistance, how this war was unique. It was unique. Then, of course, it didn't produce, many of the things that those who fought for had. It doesn't matter. But it put in actions a different concept, a different view of participation. It is as if women did not receive the right to vote by some. They fought directly. So democracy and voting for women, they came together in the moment in which there was a voluntary participation in the fight, because there was no longer state. So that was like the fortuna of Machiavelli, when you have the fortuna, that was the fortuna. Well, there was a moment of, it was interesting. And indeed, all the women, Miriam Afai and others, they collected several interesting confession, diaries, transcription of experiences during the Resistenza. It was an incredibly important fact that women of the age of 16 from the countryside in situations of barbaric subalternity and subordination, they left home and they were fighting with men alone. That was so revolutionary. And it was a free choice. It was a really idea of liberation. So that beginning is important, and it remained for several years. It didn't fly away. And indeed, the second stage of after the Resistenza was dedicated to tame that kind of radical desire for freedom. It was a normalization, a long process. Also, the Cold War, we know, for the communist women simply were working, for the other they were feminine. So they normalized exactly as if nothing happened, somehow. There was a vote, but vote shouldn't change anything, somehow. For this reason, yeah, but I know that there are many other influences. Yeah.
Please, go ahead.
Yes, just to briefly follow up this, I have a curiosity talking about, well, that's fine. The Civil War, okay. I have a curiosity continuing talking about the Italian Civil War, now talking about the reassessment by Pavone. So I vaguely remember the movie and I think the book Sangue Pazzo, or no, I don't know if I remember well the title from Marco Tullio Giordana about the family, dividing itself. So the sister actually joined the Repubblica Sociale Italiana. So what about, that's only fiction, or there is actually a presence of the women under the Second Fascist Republic as well? And this could be in some way a way in which, the women also under the fascist could, have some sort of acknowledgement that help after war. So we could do some sort of a parallel between the two sides or not?
So that was a civil war. So it was a war outside a state organization, that is outside the enrollment and the selections. It was voluntary. And in this sense, as two enemies in a civil war, radical and total enemies, they had the same kind of voluntary organization. The fascists themselves, at the beginning, when the Partito Nazionale Fascista was, instituted and before, of course, it got power, the question of the right to vote was there. They were not so against the right to vote. For instance, the right to vote for administrative elections, it was proposed by them and supported by them, even if they took away all the right to vote altogether. But there was this, as there was many women supporting fascism. Even the daughter of Antonio Labriola, Teresa Labriola, she was a nationalist and then she became very close to fascists. And she thought that the administrative administrative right to vote was important. So the question is a murky question one. And as for the civil war, you're right. It's an open war. It's a radical war.
Thank you for your talk. In a way, I would like to kind of pick up from the first question. I mean, I'm all convinced that the resistance is very important, but I still would like you to invite you to put this in a kind of European or Western context. Because the problem is, of course, with any kind of women's or emancipation movement in general in any country, there is, I think, very much an emphasis on focusing on what is particular to that particular country.
Yes.
And which really does differ quite starkly from case to case, both in terms of what's happening, but also chronologically. And yet, in all cases, you end up within about 50 years' time with about the same result. So in that sense, this is while I find it really fascinating, what is specific about the Italian case, and it would be interested to hear what you think is actually not Italian about the Italian case, but what is European or Western about the Italian case.
It's not Italian, it's part of that project. Just to make a case, when there was the Italian unification, the first movements of opinion of acculturated women they were in dialogue with England, for sure. Think about Salvatore Morelli, Anna Maria Mozzoni, and others discussing and trying to make petitions. There was connections with other with the international women associations for suffrage, and so the network, the European network for women emancipation, was there, particularly and during the liberal age, before the coming of fascism. Okay, and moreover. Think about the Socialist Party, was connected to other Socialist Party. And even if internally to the Italian Socialist Party, they were not convinced that it was good to have the right to vote, until 1919 at least, Anna Kulishov had even a strong disagreement with her husband, who was the leader of the Socialist Party, on this particular issue. And there was connections with the international working class movement, particularly the Second International, and then later on with the Leninists, also the collaboration to the Communist Party of Italy when it was started in 1921. It was also made of women, and the women emancipation was their goal, not completely, but they would accept certainly, as they did. And moreover, so there is this network of each country developed in its own way. No? Italy was one of the last to reach that point. One of the last.
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
I think that's really fascinating. But I think the one thing is about the connection of these kind of women's movements. But I think another question is about the dynamics of change that happen within countries, where you seem to suggest that there's something specific about the dynamic of change in Italy, from the dynamics of change in other countries, and yet we end up with the same result in most countries. So how do we make sense
Well,
of that?
can I add
Yeah.
to this? What would be different about France postpones women's suffrage until 1944. Like Switzerland postpones it until
73.
So what is the, what
75? I thought 73. San Marino, 73.
Okay. Well, long time. What distinguishes the French and the Italian experience? Switzerland has a mystique about militias, I know, which I think bears your point. But what distinguishes the French?
Well, they had many commonalities actually. The war of resistance was for the both of them very, very important, right? Definitely. If I had the chance to read the documents and to see how relevant it was also for them to enter in the battalion as combatants, I think it was important also for them. Clearly, I think that there is an element of relevance there. John Scott wrote in very important works about that. She's not the only one. So yes, there is the specificity for those countries that arrived after fascism. The moments of participation in the anti-fascist movement was relevant. But if you think about instead Finland, 1906, well, in that case it was a different process. It has nothing to do perhaps with a fight over an internal occupier. They had a different tradition. But in these countries, in my view, it was so important. The element of participation in a war, not a war. That was a kind of different war.
Here's a question here.
I loved your paper. Thank you for it. If I recall, isn't there a long tradition in Italian thinking about it links citizenship and soldiering? I mean, going back to De Milizia, Leonardo Bruni, and Machiavelli organizing the militia under Soderini and all of this. So I wonder if you could comment if that plays into this at all.
That is a great question, because this has to do with the political emancipation started in the ancient Athenian democracy. The trireme democracy is a democracy that, yes, they fought for the empire, but they enrolled in the army, that is in the navy, thousands of citizens. So war and fighting and sacrifice has to do with becoming a citizen. For the Republican tradition, this is for sure. Particularly, Machiavelli, in this case, is very interesting because he thought of militia paid by the taxes of the citizens themselves. Taxation and militia was the two important elements of both inclusion and freedom, right? So there is this tradition. For this reason, women were twice excluded because they were included, they were part of the nation. They were Italians, right? They were part of the nation, and yet they were foreigners inside of the nation because they didn't have the qualifications for the moment of fighting. Even Rousseau, who is a quasi, Republican egalitarian, yet he excludes women because of their inability to participate in the impersonal way to the life of the Republic because they are too connected to their family, thus to the needs and to the partiality of justice. Women have the sense of partiality of justice. They think first of their family and then all the others. Thus, they don't have the sense of justice as the virtue. And so the criticism against him by Olympiade de Gouges and by Mary Wollstonecraft, and they were precisely on the virtue of the citizen. We don't need to fight in order, we have, but in fact, we showed through the history of the nation states, the nation states were based not on militia, remember, but on conscripted armies. Not a militia, but an army based on the commanders on the top, organizing according to the call of men at the age of 18 or 19. So it became even more entrenched, the impossibility for women to fight.
Unless there's urgent questions, I'd like to ask Nadia Urbinati, for whom we're very grateful for this talk, to reflect just in conclusion on what institutional changes or otherwise would you make today to bring the status, the role of political, whatever, representation, participation of women in Italy to a condition you might think was more satisfactory than it is?
Oh my God, I cannot write the Constitution. But certainly some important few. One, an electoral law that does not content itself with prizing the majority, but trying to be more representative. And then you construct the majority, but the first step should be to have the many voices inside. I'm a Millian. John Stuart Mill had this idea that the parliament should be able to have the many voices. And then, of course, you can do it. It's not enough to have a two-party system that is very, it contains and constrains even electoral participation somehow. And particularly women. We know that in North Europe, where you have proportional representation, women are more present than men, or quasi the same proportion in the institutions. So this is, you don't need to have a quota politics. You need to have a political system of electoral system that recognizes not only the right of the majority to rule, but also the right of minority to exist and to be present and to be effective. Efficacy is very important because to be present and not to be not to be efficient is likely to be, So that one. The second one, I agree with the Constitutional Court. You cannot make by law a quota that is a number of seats for absolutely not. You can make it for cases like we had, for a border, in the border of the nations, there are some national minorities, the South Tyrol and so on. So this is different because this has to do with the specificity that is multinational. But women are not multinational. Women are part of the citizenry, like the others. So, but the forms of policies helping to have more services for women instead of less. You know that there is didn't have time. There is a model called Mediterranean model of reformulation of the welfare state, meaning family takes care of all the needy in Italy, meaning children and elderly citizens. And women they go back to home, and the state and the dismantling of the welfare state is a kind of a justification and a help of this model. Thus, this model implies that the women return to have a hyper family and private domain. This is something negative. No matter whether they would or not participate in elections, but there should be a system in which the separation of the roles is not so entrenched by needs, necessities, or social policies. And finally, some incentives. The French model of the parité, which is a model that perhaps is going to be changed or perhaps is not satisfiable. I don't know. I don't want to enter in this debate. But it is a system that at least gives the incentive to those parties who refuse not to have an equal number of men and women inside of the list. They decide, it's free. They decide they don't want to have an extra support by the financial support by the state in order not to have women. But that would be much better than simply to let them, as they are today, the parties are left to themselves to decide. And sometimes you need incentives. So this is very mild, as you can see. Well, finally, and then I conclude. I don't know whether this will produce something. And for me, it's still completely irrelevant, the outcome. I don't pay attention to the outcome. It is possible if you have more women, you have worse legislation. This is not my problem. My problem is by principle. It's a problem of condition of opportunity for being part of the same enterprise. Then one takes one step or one avenue, the other avenue. So I bet I don't know whether the outcome is good. Very fair?
That's fair enough, sure. I'm just thinking of all the social categories or gender categories which we have declared need rights of representation, whether in the university or in the society. And we know with each one, we think there's an added increment of justice in some sense. But we don't know, can't envisage for the future, which category will become urgent or make claims. But I think this talk is admirably brought together the history of the Italian Republic and ongoing agenda of rights and representation. And I'd like to think Gaetano Salvemini would have been forceful in his opinions, I'm sure, and so it's been high time that women have been represented on this platform and in this thing, and thank you for having done that for us. We all owe you a great debt of gratitude, and to the Italian consulate for having supported this, and so thank you, and we have a reception upstairs for everyone. So.
Thanks a lot.